All right, my name is David Kaufman. I'm the acting director for the Center for Jewish Studies here at York University, and we are very delighted to be hosting this book launch event. We do a number of literary events, often centered on sort of the Canadian Jewish literary imagination, and we do a lot of other public events. So welcome to York, welcome to campus, welcome to those of you who watch at some point later. This is a particularly pleasurable introduction to make because this is the first time the center has hosted an event that is in which both participants are research affiliates here at the center. So it gives me extra great pleasure. Dr. Liat Naeh, here to my left, is a poet and author of short stories in Hebrew, published in venues such as Haaretz and Granta, and recently has had her first book of poetry published, which has won some awards. She's also a scholar and a museum professional who focuses on the art and archaeology of the Middle East during the Bronze and Iron Ages. And she's held postdoctoral fellowships at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the Bard Center, both in New York. And she is currently teaching at the University of Toronto, and we're very proud that she is one of our affiliates. She will be serving as the interviewant and discussant with our esteemed author, Dr. Marina Zilbergerts, who is a scholar of Jewish literature and thought. In addition to this poetry work, which we'll be discussing today, she's the author of The Yeshiva and the Rise of Modern Hebrew Literature. From 2016 to 2022, she was the Lipton Assistant Professor of East European Jewish Studies at University of Madison, Wisconsin. She grew up in Zhitomir in Tel Aviv and Toronto and received her PhD from Stanford. Her first book of poetry, which we'll be discussing today, her first book, this is not the first book. This is the first book of poetry, indeed. It's a retelling of Genesis stories. It's called You Were Adam, and it appeared with Whip and Stock. Marina is currently a research associate here, as I say, and is working on a new book about narrative voice in the Hebrew Bible. We're very pleased to welcome this conversation and look forward to it. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, David, for this introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you all of you for coming. We are so excited to celebrate the publication of this new poetry collection by Dr. Marina Zilbergerts, titled You Were Adam. It was published in 2022 with Whip and Stock. Thank you so much, David, for this wonderful introduction. We are very grateful and honored and for the Israel and Golda Kaczynski Center for Jewish Studies of York University and the Department of English, who are both the generous hosts of this event. So let me start by reading one of the most wonderful poems, You Were Adam, which is also the title of the book. So I don't know if anyone wants to follow. There are some books here at the corner if you'd like to pick up. I'm reading from page 4. You were Adam. I put on Eve's skin to get your attention. I wanted you all to myself, to know myself, to wrap myself around you, to swallow you whole. You were a fledgling in the garden of youth, free of the generation of age. A boy in a beautiful male body, slim sinews shining beneath your t-shirt sleeve, playing ball in the garden. I was all-knowing and all-wanting, including your schedule, your address, with whom you spent your time. I touched your perfect body with my mind, stripped away your past experiences one by one. The dream taste of satisfaction, pleasing to the palate, and good for knowledge was near. I'll stop here. I can tell by Marina's face how painful it is to hear someone read your poem aloud. It's just the beginning. Um, yeah, this is one of the opening poems, and it really leads us directly into your Garden of Eden, where we see you playfully assume the role of sometimes the snake, sometimes Eve. And it ushers us into this musical rhythm of your writing. And if you read Marina's book, it's incredibly musical. And your writing and your world of associations, and I hear, I hope you'll agree, some Leonard Cohen here with his Suzanne when he talks of Jesus touching our perfect bodies with his mind. And I also hear, I really can't help it, but I hear the echoes of all ancient Near Eastern myths of creation, and of course, biblical narrative that I know you're also working on, talking about how our perfect bodies are all formed in the likeness of God. So, Marina, can you tell us a little bit about the birth of this book?
For this, for your reading, and absolutely, I guess as a poet, you know that there's a lot of creativity that really exploded from many people in the wake of the pandemic, and the desire to break free, break out of the mold. So this book is very much a product of that. Even though I have been writing since I was a child, it's something that just came naturally to me. But this is my first poetry book. And in lieu of that, the book is really about creation and creativity. So creation in Hebrew, as we know, is yetzirah. But there's also another thing that this book is about, and it's a certain transgressive type of creativity, a creativity that wants to break through the boundaries. And we know that in Jewish thought, there's the concept of yetzer, the desire or sometimes evil inclination. There's a good inclination and evil inclination. It's really interesting that they have the same root. And the idea is that the thing in you, that the drive that creates, is this free agent. And so this book is about really exploring this idea of creation, creativity, the drive for creativity, and which is sometimes transgressive, sometimes very a potent kind of drive. And I'm glad that you heard, obviously, the reference to Leonard Cohen, who writes, who in Suzanne talks in two different verses, says, "I touched your perfect body with my mind." But I'm not thinking of Jesus here, because Jesus is actually very much embodied. But God in the Jewish tradition actually struggles with trying to convince everyone that he is not embodied and that he does not have a body, and that you stop drawing pictures of me and so on. And so in trying to have a relationship with people, God throughout the Torah struggles with being intangible. And this is very much actually the condition of the poet and artist. The poet and artist that views themselves as a mind that is trying to touch something. Like, good luck trying to touch something with your mind, you know? And so this poem gets into the mind of the snake in the Garden of Eden, who is very much an orator, a disembodied voice. He doesn't have much of a body. And the Midrash in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, it's a very classic Jewish Midrash, tells us a fascinating story of the snake. And it tells us that the snake thought he should be Adam's partner because he has, similar interests and similar type of intelligence. And he was trying to get Eve away from him. And the whole story of the Garden of Eden and the temptation was actually to displace Eve. And so this is really the story of a kind of a creative mind who is dealing with this creature And at the end of the poem, I guess we should, the real danger is not the seduction by the snake, but the danger is the loss of the inspiration and the loss of that creativity, because what happens to this Adam at the end of the poem is something fascinating, and it is what happens to each and every single one of us as we go through life, which is we sort of lose sometimes we lose the magic touch, or that is the fear at least. I'll finish the poem. I prayed to God to keep you whole, and he kept his promise, but something else got you anyway. She was a good woman, not cunning, no poet. A few years later, you took a job in finance, and the rest is history.
Thank you. Yeah, that's I think a fantastic introduction. So after COVID, that sort of creative impulse to recreate a world that was lost, but also thinking of that legacy, that Jewish legacy. I mean, even when you're not a god, you still have a problem having a body, and I think that is recurrent throughout the book. And indeed, I think once you get a chance to read through the poems, you see Marina taking up the role of a poet, creating multiple worlds, and sometimes they're mythic worlds, sometimes they're domestic mini universes, and they all sort of intertwine beautifully. But there is another creator in this book, another god, and that is the lover. The male to your female, the husband to your wife. And this lover is also the maker of the poet in a way. And we get to see how the speaker and the lover keep changing roles throughout the book. And they keep recreating each other in a way over and over again in this reciprocal, mutual, never-ending cycle. And always sort of reasserting where one begins and another one ends. I'd love to read some of another poem, now on page 13, There Was Light. Let's see. There was light. At first there was darkness and solitude over the blue, and I said, let there be you. And there was light. And light poured in rivers from my mouth to yours, from your lips to mine. Light flowed like honey, like time. And time had taken on measure and form, and there were stars in the evening and love in the morning, and it was good. So I wanted to ask, in our previous conversations, we talked a lot about this underlying tension between this inner erotic landscape and our lived-in everyday identities. I want us to ask, could you tell us a little bit about how eros and Jewish faith coexist in this book? And what is eros to you? And how can you make peace with it? How can we reconcile this tension between writing really passionate poetry and the idea of holiness in our lives?
Thank you for your reading, and this is a great question, an important question. So I guess I'll start with what is eros. Spinoza has this idea of cannabis. He talks about it in ethics, and I was really interested in this idea. The idea of cannabis is the desire of all living things to keep existing. So I'm sort of jumping off of that to defining what eros means to me. Eros is the desire of all things for connection. It's the desire of all things for kind of intimacy and interconnectedness. And it's a form of a mystical it's a mystical form of sensuality. And this is obviously coming straight out of Jewish thought and Jewish texts and mystical Jewish ideas from the Kabbalah. And it's a really big deal because the Kabbalah views this idea of union between opposites, and the way that the sefirot work with each other and sort of communicate with each other as the highest form of holiness. So in a sense, union and connectedness and interconnectedness and the desire to connect is actually in potential, in Jewish thought, at the highest form of, it's elevated to the highest form of holiness. If you're applying this idea to the Creator, we have to understand that this eros that all things have, this desire to be connected to the source, to each other, is fundamentally insatiable. As soon as it is satisfied, it ceases to be eros, or you cease to be. So there's no way to, it's it's something that's unfulfillable. It's kind of like this asymptote that goes on forever. And in terms of how to reconcile it, I can only talk about in terms of writing. In terms of my writing of this, and trying to express some of these ideas and some of the sensuality in the poems in language, I found it to be very tricky, because eros has this tendency that it thrives on obfuscation, and it thrives on not the language not being explicit and being a little bit mysterious, and so there's a really fine line between using language to convey eros to your reader, but when you cross that line and when the writing becomes too explicit, it becomes pornographic. So that is very much the profanation of the holiness. So it's these, I work in these two dichotomies, and I tread carefully, and I try to err on the side of caution in this poem.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful response. Thinking of erotic passion as this desire to connect on all levels. I think that can definitely coexist together with this sense of holiness, for sure. I'd like to invite you now to read a little bit from I Was Your First on page 9, and then one of my favorites, My Lord You, on page 71.
Really embodies what I just tried to explain about this insatiable eros, and it's a conversation between a creature and the source, or a soul and a bigger soul, or the soul of God. It's a conversation where both parties are looking for each other and can't find each other. I was your first. When light broke through the panes, there was joy in the pain. In the early glimmers of consciousness, I was your first idea. The music of the spheres resounded through the silence of space, and I heard you laugh and cry. The world widened with awe inside your pupils. You could feel the light with your eyes closed. I was always close. You were with me from the start, but I have lost my way. Letters flicker and fade out of focus, static and noises in the dark. Fragments of memory connected by time. An endless web keeps us apart. Why can I not see you, be you? Without you, there is no I nor be. Show your face to me. Give me water, your sweet water. Now, moving on to a lighter side of this whole kind of dynamic of these relationships to a poem that you asked to read called My Lord You. My Lord You. And I'm just going to page 71, and I'll say a couple of words that My Lord You is a poem about domestic life. It's not so much, not written in such a high Genesis-like register, but the allusion is actually from Ezra Pound, from a famous poem called The River Merchant's Wife. And I believe the occasion was Ezra Pound's visit to Japan, where he encountered a whole new form of patriarchy, or I'm not sure if he actually made it to Japan, but he read some translations, but in the poem, My Lord You is the strange appellation that this woman calls her husband that never comes. So without further ado, My Lord You. He hangs nothing on his wall but a picture of Franz Kafka and his keychain in the hall. He pardons his torn socks and gives them lives anew as rags for shining his old docks. He reigns over all things and words, and they obey his gentle laws. The ordered sentences rejoice. The roll of toothpaste joins in song. No waste shall issue from the tongue. No new thing started until the old one's done. If all things bow to My Lord You, then I must too. At least I try. If only I could get these clothes to dry and clear the mess out of the way, so he could say when he comes home, My dear, you worked so hard today.
Yeah, I have to say this is one of my favorites just because it does come from a poet who is this amazing scholar, a professor. So I think that's an important voice to the body of feminist writing, even to me. The burden of love is really something that ties together those domestic universes and those mythical, divine ones. And the lover is always held at the highest moral standard, and the lover is always at fault, forever on trial. And the book is also very explicit about this idea of punishment. And from the embrace of those erotic heavens, the speaker descends into a sort of a desert, which is even a hell in a way, and that is Toronto suburbia. And it's a hilarious and often very sad collection of poems inside this book. And again, it's sort of the juxtaposition of those divine and very earthly spheres together that has that powerful impact. And in that suburbia, hellish desert, the poet is not able to express her intellect. She is muted. She is left to communicate with inanimate objects and converse with a lot of taunting voices in her head. And I would like to invite you to read two poems that are in this amazing dialogue with each other. Alti Zaken in page 53, and then Wicked in page 56.
That was a really strong description, Liat. There's nothing that inspires poetry like the Toronto suburbs. Absolutely. So I'm going to read a poem called Alte Sachen, which in Yiddish means old stuff or junk. And I want to say a few words as a preface. So when I was around 4.5, 5, I immigrated with my family from Zhitomir, Ukraine, to Tel Aviv, and we lived in somewhat of what was then a bad neighborhood. It was called Shchonat Tikva, a poor neighborhood. And every couple of days, there was a guy with, I don't remember whether it was a horse, a drawn buggy, or whether it was like a a pickup truck that was falling apart, and he would go through the streets and yell on a speaker, alte Sachen, which meant that you can give him your old stuff for selling or you can buy old stuff from him. Many years later, I immigrated to Toronto, and then I left Toronto and returned. It's a long and torturous path, but I have discovered on walks in my neighborhood the sheer amount of alte Sachen that people throw out. And I would walk through the streets and see such fancy and expensive toys being thrown out, and I would just collect them all for my kids, and I thought I made a real good deal. And I was always, and I would see so much stuff, but I wouldn't see any people to talk to. I wouldn't, let's say, see friendly neighbors walking around who'd want to chat. And so I felt being surrounded by this stuff, this alte Sachen, this junk that nobody wants, except for me, I guess. And really, the poem is a reflection on a culture that is kind of consumerist and materialist, and when these things take the place of where connection, the connection that I so yearn, should be. And as I walk through these streets of stuff, I have this nostalgia childhood nostalgia of places in my previous life in Israel and Tel Aviv, I guess, where there's more vibrancy, more life, and more jouissance. So, alte Sachen. Not a soul in the street, and my thoughts give me no rest. I passed by bubble wrap discarded on the front lawn of this clean Toronto suburb. Almost summer, Sunday, 9 p.m. There are a few bodies on the street, but not one soul. Garbage in neat piles ready for collection day. Souls are hiding from collection day. Warm air, but no breath of life. Still a long way till morning. A long way to go until I meet somebody. Not a soul in the street, and my thoughts give me no rest. Sunday night treasure hunt along the wealthy streets of Thornhill. Found a pair of pink Nike shoes, size 5.5. Removed one shoelace. Found broken children's water table. Found strange contraption with 20 broomsticks sticking out. What is that? Found beautiful full moon and a milky cloud. Found my own shadow on the ground. Found pieces of plywood, hardwood, and cardboard. Found magnolia in bloom. Found lights that shine through windows. Found cared for porches, fake statues, birds, and chime bells. Found a couple of bodies walking around, still no soul. Found rustling neighbors nearby. Found UFO in the sky. Found someone's ski-doo in the driveway of a $1.5 million home on a middle-class street waiting for its 2-day summer adventure. Found empty bottles of beer drunk by teens with no life. Found, on my way back, pink Nikes, 5.5 with one shoelace removed because I'm the one who took it. Found a raccoon crossing the road. Found tulips planted in a neat row. Found leather chair which belonged to an aging accountant. Found studded dark leather sofa from a house going on sale. Found a box-style TV from 2001. Found puddles from a sprinkler on the ground. Not a soul in the street, but the smell of water from the sprinklers that leaked onto the pavement reminds me of evenings in Tel Aviv. Found little son, children's drawing in chalk.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And I can really, I think it gives us a sense of the sort of journey that you take us through in this sort of a very figurative, full existence that you're able to create in this sort of intellectual desert. But it also connects with your very impressive wicked, which is sort of what is happening inside those closed doors in the suburbia, especially with women being left behind, waiting for their families to return from the outside world.
So the next poem that I'm going to read, and this is really the longest poem. It's kind of it's almost like a ballad type poem from the collection. Is called Wicked, and Wicked is about it's the story of a woman, like a housewife possibly, who goes crazy from boredom, living in the suburbs, and her unlikely friend becomes kind of like this devil-like figure. So as a scholar of Slavic literature in part, narratives where the Satan or the devil comes and becomes an active participant in the narrative are quite, it's a strong tradition. And I was very much inspired by just the whole kind of canon of this kind of literature. And also a little bit by the Isaac Bashevis story, Tybal and her demon. And we see this devilish character, sometimes they're a seducer, a petty disturber, kind of like an annoyance, almost like a petty demon. But very often this devil is the voice of truth. And he becomes this woman's one and only friend, and he follows her around on all of the errands that she has to run. And the finale, there is a little ironic denouement where she takes everything he taught her and uses it against him to abandon him in the end. So I will try to read now Wicked on page 56. Yeah. Wicked. Rabbi Ishmael taught, if you encounter the wicked one, drag him to the study house. I wish I could drag him to the gym. He hates exercise and feeds me chocolate for breakfast and lunch. Or take him on a walk around the neighborhood. Tell him that I recognize that the coyote and the bird garbage cans in the park are all his shenanigans. If he refuses to go to the study house, since we are both not exactly welcome there, fill the pail with warm water and soap, seat him on the broom, and drag him back and forth and side to burn the demons. Like my mother says, you need to exercise until the tiles shine your reflection. Try sorting the laundry together if he lets, or open a book of fiction. Maybe The Master and Margarita, maybe Lolita, and read to each other. I too create beauty, he'll insist, and you need me. And you'll say, go to hell, and spend the rest of the evening playing for him on your guitar. The next morning, you're both very hungry, and since he distracted you last night, no one bothered to buy milk for breakfast. Your husband is frustrated with you, and he is more than happy to rub it in. And that's what you get for being my pet. Urgently, throw him in the car. I think he's responsible for the Toronto suburbs because he hates walking. And drive him to Sobeys Kosher Supermarket. Put on sunglasses against the evil eye. Put on a mask to avoid scandal. Enlightened for the checkout, I suddenly think of hell. I begin to regret ever coming here. I think of how dangerously expensive everything is. There are too many D-books hustling in line. At least we know who we truly are, I whisper in his ear. He likes to crash in the holiest moments, when lighting candles, in the 18 minutes of confusion, during Shalom Aleichem, during Kiddush, a voyeur in the bedroom, during the Ne'ilah prayer on Yom Kippur, in the holiest part of the service. He hovers overhead the sweating, swaying, hungry Jews and yells to me, all this suffering for what? He hides my keys and loses all my pens, mismatches all the socks in the house, which, relatively speaking, is a minor nuisance. He tickles me during the national anthem, puts pushes me to touch things in public spaces. I never go to museums anymore. Visits my dreams. Recently, we have started to get along, become friends almost. Wicked, I tell him, you know what I like about you? He's smiling already. That you are not lying to me by pretending to be good. He starts up again. Did you see all the people in the supermarket? Some of these women really let themselves go. Shut up! They're good pious mothers. I don't hold a candle to them. And the new guy at shul, he goes off again. Defrauded 20 people in the community, and instead of warning everyone about him, the rabbi gave him an aliyah. I walk off abruptly to grab a Maimonides from the shelf. You don't actually enjoy reading that. Love for him was an intellectual pleasure. What did he understand? Wicked, do you want me to retract everything good that I said about you? Go to hell. Go to the devil's mother. That would be you. I'm not your mother. Oh, God. I give up. It's like that with him every day now. I was intrigued by the mothers in the supermarket. Recently, I started watching videos on YouTube about how to be a better woman, a better mother and wife. I started going to a weekly Torah class, found a brilliant learning partner for Tractate Sanhedrin, started working harder around the house, keeping the kids organized, making good lunches, going for walks. Even my husband was becoming proud of me. He looked at me smugly when I was getting ready for class. You know, you'll be back here soon enough, he said. What didn't he try to throw at me that week? Lectures by Richard Dawkins, a seminar on Lucretius, a close friend who tried to prove to me that God is actually evil, opportunities to tempt colleagues, make friends' wives jealous, a surprise shopping spree, illusions of grandeur, vanity of vanities. When nothing worked, he just lay there like a sick devil on the couch, coughing and waiting for me to come. Wicked, you're right, I coaxed him. I know you will never leave me alone, but aren't you the one who always encouraged me to do what makes me feel the most alive? But aren't I what makes you feel most alive? But Wicked, I continued, what if I'm no longer attracted to you? I can look like anyone you want. That's not the thing. It's the feeling I get when I want to experience what it's like to feel holy, pure. Then let's go to the study house together. You will not have to sneak in disguised like Yentl. You will enter as a woman, as Helen of Troy. Your flaming hair, your eyes, your wit will dazzle in the dark sea of men. Stop. Fine, how about couples counseling then? He joked, defeated. My heart was filled with remorse. Wicked, you are so sweet. Thank you, I said, and gently kissed his burning forehead on my way out.
Thank you, Marina. I think that is a song, I think, or a poem that will remain with so many of us. And it does begin with this connection to the Talmud, where Wicked is sort of the remedy against him is to take him to the study house. Yes. And of course, you as a woman, as a sort of Yentl of sorts, are a bit denied of that entry. And I love this because, I mean, the punishment here is to be this domestic wife where, I mean, in fact, there are so many intellectual, vistas inside her. So if you could comment a little bit on that.
Well, the interesting thing is that the character in the poem gets over it. And on a personal note, I have actually in my younger years, tried this little exercise of walking into a Beit Midrash filled with a black and white sea of men, as it says, and trying getting kicked out of this several times. And we have spoken about it with friends on occasion. And so, in a sense, the main character embraces having a permanent counterpart that's always pushing her to break these boundaries, and this is who she is, you know. He's her friend.
Indeed,
Mhm.
this is who she is. I will finish with, I think, a question that is dearest to me, I think. You've mentioned, I mean, your journeys from Zhitomir in the Ukraine to Israel and Canada and the US and back again and back again. And you're a true polyglot. You speak several languages. I'm not even sure I know how many. And I'm really interested to hear about your choice to write in English. That is definitely a dilemma for me, to decide which language to write in. Is it according to the place where I'm in? Is it my inner language, whatever that is?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I guess throughout my travels and immigrations, I've acquired several native languages that are simultaneously native to me. And Hebrew being one of them, Russian being another, and English is my native language. And, I love English and I love English literature. And so it was just a natural choice to write in it, but all the poetry here is, just naturally kind of intertextual, where, you hear the rhythm from Russian poetry that always rhymes, but English poetry does not, and Hebrew poetry, and obviously the um, scriptural narratives from the Torah. And so all of it really kind of coexists. And also, I guess as a scholar, a scholar of literature, all the intertextual connections of all the world literature that I've studied as a scholar of comparative literature, they just kind of like coexist and are a part of my inner language.
Thank you. So yes, so many more languages are hiding in this English on surface value.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, okay. I think I will stop here and maybe open up for some questions from the audience. If anyone would like to share
Thank you.
their thoughts, questions, comments.
I don't exactly know how to phrase it, but it's something about switching writing voices as an academic writer and a writer of poetry. And I guess I'm curious, obviously the process is different. I imagine you experience it differently. That seems to be an obvious point to make, but I'm curious, I suppose, about how much the textual references and the kind of history of literacy and the literary theory that occupies part of your brain and makes its way into the book has to be like thoughtfully put in there, or if you have to kind of turn off that academic thinking brain in order for it to just gurgle up on its own, something like that.
That's a great question. Thank you. It's the complete opposite. Poetry is my natural brain. I have to turn off the poetry in order to be an academic. And so it's kind of like when I'm more in academic circles, poetry is like kind of a Tourette's problem you want to like repress. And so it's very much a natural process. It's a liberating process. It's a process that I just, when you're hungry for inspiration, it comes. Um, as a scholar, we're trained for many, many years in so many scholarly practices and in different frameworks of convention and rigor, and so that is what I've worked hard to cultivate, and this is very much a natural process for me. Thank you. Mhm. Thank you. So sometimes the poems are in my head when I do things around the house, or for instance, with a poem about Altazachen. I was, trying to be good about exercising. I was walking in my neighborhood, and suddenly poetry started coming out, and I recorded it on my cell phone. So it's an artistic process that happens. And what can you mm-hmm. It's not usually. It's when life is joyful, the poetry doesn't come out. You have to be a little bit hungry, and have to be kind of like starving for it. But the process of publishing is entirely different from the creativity part, and certainly it's something that I thought many times about, because it's a type of exposure, and it's not. As a scholar, you don't have any of that. You just you enjoy saying things that are neutral, and it's either good or it's not well supported, and then you get criticized, but you're not dealing with personal material, and this is a new experience in that sense. Thank you. I studied poetry and comparative literature from a comparative literature standpoint. So I studied world poetry, a very wide kind of selection. But it started coming as a child. My first poem I must have written it when I was like in grade 2. It was about mermaids in Hebrew. So and there's periods of on and off, and I also enjoy other things, music and painting, and there's not enough time for everything.
Thank you so much, Marina. For just as a finishing note, I was wondering if you could read a little bit from Hallelujah.
Okay, we'll end on a poem called Hallelujah to Sound. It's on page 27, and it's actually for those who love and enjoy doing music. It describes the experience of connection that we get when we play music with others or with ourselves. It's about music. Hallelujah to sound. Hallelujah to the hand that holds. Hallelujah to fingers pressing. Hallelujah to eyes focused, eyes closed. Hallelujah to the beating drum, to the pick and the strum, to the widening of time, to the chill down the spine, to the stretch of the string, and to its sting before letting go. Hallelujah to the tongue we both know. Hallelujah to the spotlight on the empty stage and to its shadow 2 steps down. Hallelujah in rhythm and rhyme. Hallelujah in breath to breath, a breath away from mine, and to being one. Hallelujah.